At 70 years old, Kevin Costner, the rugged embodiment of American masculinity, stands at a point few Hollywood legends ever reach, an age where legacy begins to speak louder than fame. For over 4 decades, Costner has shaped cinema with the quiet gravitas of his characters. From The Untouchables and Field of Dreams to Dances with Wolves and Yellowstone. But now, as he reflects on the fragile balance between art and humanity, reports suggest he's making a deeply personal decision, deciding who will not stand by his graveside when the credits of his life finally roll. He's not morbid, one longtime collaborator revealed. He's practical, even philosophical. Kevin wants his farewell to represent the truth of his life, not the Hollywood performance of it. Those close to him describe this reflection not as bitterness, but as a search for authenticity. In an industry built on illusion, Costner has always craved something real. He reportedly told friends that when his time comes, he doesn't want to see faces there for appearances, only those who shared genuine loyalty and respect. If they didn't respect me in life, he once said quietly, they don't belong at my funeral. It's a statement as blunt and unfiltered as the man himself, a declaration born not of pride, but of deep scars left by betrayal, humiliation, and disappointment. And tonight, we uncovered the 6 names, 6 ghosts of Hollywood relationships that Kevin Costner has reportedly crossed off the guest list for eternity. Each name tells a story of respect lost, trust broken, and the price a man pays for refusing to play pretend in a world built on pretense. It was the early 1990s. Kevin Costner was untouchable. Fresh off his Oscar triumph with Dances with Wolves and the back-to-back hits, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and The Bodyguard, he was the kind of Hollywood royalty everyone wanted to meet. And then there was Madonna, the queen of pop, at her own creative peak, rewriting the rules of fame with her provocative Blonde Ambition tour and the documentary Truth or Dare. 2 cultural titans, 2 worlds colliding. When Costner attended one of her concerts, he did so as a fan and fellow artist, bringing his young children backstage to meet her. He watched her performance, smiled, and in his usual understated way told her the show was neat. A harmless word, a simple, polite compliment. But what happened next would become one of the most humiliating moments of his public life. After Costner left the room, Madonna turned to the camera and mocked him, making a gagging gesture as if his compliment disgusted her. The moment, captured forever in Truth or Dare, spread worldwide, painting Costner as a square, old-fashioned, the kind of man the cool kids laughed at. He felt ambushed, recalled a close friend. He brought his kids to meet someone he admired, only to realize he was being used for a cheap laugh. It wasn't just a personal slight, it was a public humiliation. And for a man who valued dignity, that wound never truly healed. He mentioned Madonna specifically, revealed one longtime business associate. He said, I don't want anyone at my funeral who mocked me behind my back. If Madonna shows up, have security escort her out. He might have said it with a half smile, but everyone knew the pain behind it was real. To this day, those who know him best say that incident changed how he viewed celebrity culture. The performative friendships, the insincerity, the hollow smiles, it stripped away the illusion that fame equals respect. Kevin Costner never retaliated, never spoke publicly about it, but his silence said more than any headline could. For him, dignity isn't loud, it's quiet, unbending, and unforgettable. If there's one thing Hollywood loves, it's a clash of egos. On few rivalries embodied that more quietly, yet more powerfully, than the unspoken tension between Kevin Costner and Sean Penn. On the surface, they seemed like kindred spirits. Both were intense, ambitious, uncompromising actors who didn't just want to perform, they wanted to direct, to shape stories, to define what serious filmmaking meant. But behind the scenes, those similarities became fuel for friction. Two alpha males, one industry, explained a producer who had worked with both men. They were mirrors of each other, talented, proud, and utterly convinced of their own vision. And that made collaboration impossible. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, when both were rising fast, Hollywood insiders whispered about the tension. Costner was the box office golden boy, The Untouchables, Field of Dreams, Dances with Wolves. Penn was the critics' darling, raw, unpredictable, and intense. They were competing for the same kind of respect, recalled the casting director. Costner wanted the critical recognition Penn had. Penn, in turn, envied Costner's commercial dominance. Over time, the competition curdled into quiet disdain. Penn's politically charged activism, meeting world leaders, flying into war zones, clashed with Costner's more reserved traditional patriotism. Kevin and Sean represent two different Americas, said a former studio executive. Sean is confrontation. Kevin is contemplation. They never worked together, not once in 4 decades, not because they were rivals on paper, but because both knew sharing the same set would ignite something combustible. Years later, when Costner was reportedly reflecting on who he'd want at his funeral, Sean Penn's name surfaced again. He mentioned not wanting performative grief, a friend recalled. Kevin said something like, "If he shows up, it would be about him, not me." It wasn't anger, it was clarity. For Costner, there was nothing worse than the false performance of emotion, especially from someone who had never respected him in life. Two men, two legends, two egos, too proud to coexist. Their silent rivalry became one of Hollywood's most enduring Cold Wars, one that neither man ever needed to declare aloud. For millions around the world, The Bodyguard wasn't just a movie, it was an emotion. Kevin Costner, the stoic protector. Whitney Houston, the luminous star. Together they created cinematic magic, a love story that defined an era and produced the best-selling soundtrack in history. When Whitney passed away in 2012, it was Costner who stood before the world at her funeral, voice trembling but strong, delivering a eulogy that remains one of the most heartfelt moments in Hollywood history. He spoke not as a co-star, but as a man mourning someone he truly cared about. But in the years that followed, that beautiful memory began to darken, because behind the scenes, his relationship with Whitney's estate reportedly deteriorated. A painful fallout rooted in creative control, contracts, and the fragile question of who had the right to preserve her legacy. For Kevin, it was never about money, explained one entertainment lawyer familiar with the matter. He wanted to honor what they built together. But the estate saw things differently. They thought he was trying to control the narrative. Costner had long dreamed of creating a sequel to The Bodyguard, a project that would celebrate Whitney's memory and the power of the story they shared. But negotiations reportedly became tense, filled with lawyers, clauses, and broken trust. It became about ownership, not art, a close friend revealed. Kevin felt like the people managing Whitney's legacy cared more about profit than preserving the truth of who she was. The disappointment ran deep. For a man who had once spoken of Whitney with such tenderness, the idea that her representatives might question his motives cut him to the core. He confided to friends that he didn't want certain people from Whitney's estate anywhere near his funeral. After everything we shared, he reportedly said, they turned it into business. It wasn't anger, it was heartbreak. To Costner, The Bodyguard had been a story about trust, protection, and love beyond the screen. To see that story reduced to legal disputes was, for him, a betrayal not of contracts, but of memory itself. And perhaps that's why this wound, more than any public feud, stayed with him. Because it wasn't a clash between stars, it was a fracture in something once pure and deeply human. In 2003, Kevin Costner stepped behind the camera once again to direct, produce, and star in Open Range, a sweeping Western that critics still call one of his finest works. Beside him was Robert Duvall, the legendary actor revered for The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, and Lonesome Dove, an icon Costner had admired since his youth. For Kevin, working with Duvall was a dream come true. But on the set of Open Range, that dream quietly began to unravel. What audiences saw was magic, recalled a crew member from the production. What we saw was tension, subtle but unmistakable. Both men were masters of their craft. Both had powerful ideas about a storytelling. But as filming went on, their creative visions began to clash. Not in shouting matches, but in something far more painful: silence, resistance, and unspoken disappointment. Duvall had his way of working, intuitive, free, deeply rooted in character, said a former assistant director. Kevin, as both actor and director, had a very precise vision. When those worlds didn't align, the atmosphere froze. The disagreements weren't explosive, but they were constant, about tone, pacing, even the emotional depth of certain scenes. It became a quiet battle of wills between two men who both loved the Western, but saw it through very different eyes. Kevin respected Duvall profoundly, which made every disagreement sting even more. He idolized him, said a longtime friend. To have that relationship turn cold, it hurt deeply. He'd hoped for camaraderie, but what he got was creative distance. Years later, Costner reportedly reflected on the experience with bittersweet clarity. He said something like, "I don't want anyone at my funeral who didn't respect my direction," a close confidant revealed. It wasn't said in anger, it was said in resignation. Because for Costner, respect wasn't about ego. It was about trust. He believed that when two artists come together, they must meet each other with faith in the other's vision. When that trust breaks, something sacred in the craft breaks with it. And though Open Range remains a triumph, the memory behind it is shadowed by that quiet heartbreak. The realization that sometimes, even among legends, admiration can turn into disillusionment. It began as one of Hollywood's most powerful creative partnerships and ended as one of its loudest implosions. When Kevin Costner agreed to star in Yellowstone in 2018, few could have imagined that the quiet man of Dances with Wolves would help create television's biggest modern Western. And even fewer could have predicted how spectacularly it would all fall apart. For years, Costner and Taylor Sheridan, the show's creator, seemed inseparable. Two visionaries crafting an American saga about power, land, and legacy. The show didn't just revive Costner's career, it made him an icon for a new generation. But behind the grandeur of the Dutton Ranch trouble was brewing. What began as mutual respect, said a Paramount insider, slowly turned into a tug-of-war for control. As Yellowstone exploded in popularity, Sheridan expanded the universe, prequels, spin-offs, new characters, while Costner's attention turned toward his own dream project, Horizon, a multi-part Western epic he had been nurturing for decades. Two massive visions, one limited man, and not enough time for both. The tension over scheduling and creative direction soon spiraled into something personal. Kevin felt misunderstood, said a producer familiar with both camps. He believed he was being painted as uncommitted, even difficult, when in truth he was trying to honor his obligations to both projects. As leaks to the press began to spread, both sides went silent publicly, but privately the fallout was fierce. Each new headline sharpened the wound. Costner clashing with Sheridan, Yellowstone star refusing to return, creative chaos on set. The public narrative broke him, shared a close friend. He'd given everything to that role, to that show, and suddenly he was being portrayed as the villain. In private conversations, Costner reportedly mentioned Sheridan by name when reflecting on who he'd want at his funeral. He said, "If someone rewrote my story while I was still living it, they don't get to stand over my grave pretending they respected me." The feud wasn't just about a show, it was about integrity. For Costner, the real betrayal wasn't creative disagreement. It was public misrepresentation. To be misunderstood by someone he once trusted was a deeper wound than any headline could capture. And so, what had started as the crowning chapter of his career became another painful reminder of Hollywood's oldest truth. Even the most loyal partnerships can be rewritten when power and perception collide. In the golden age of 1990s Hollywood, few names shone brighter than Kevin Costner and Julia Roberts. He was the stoic leading man, the face of American heroism. She was the radiant star, the symbol of charm and emotion. Together, they seemed destined to share the screen. And yet, it never happened. Over the decades, their paths crossed again and again. Scripts were written, deals were drafted, announcements were teased, but somehow, every project that paired them, a thriller here, a romantic drama there, mysteriously collapsed. "It wasn't coincidence," said one veteran casting director. "When two A-listers keep circling the same projects but never make it to set, something deeper is going on." Some insiders whispered about contract disputes, disagreements over billing or creative direction. Others hinted at something more personal, a private conversation that went wrong, a misunderstanding never mended. Whatever it was, the result was always the same: silence. And in an industry that thrives on gossip, that silence became its own kind of legend. "No one ever leaked the real reason," said a publicist. "That's how you know it mattered to both of them." For Costner, though, the repeated rejections reportedly left a quiet mark. Not because he needed Julia Roberts' approval, but because he valued connection, honesty, and mutual respect. He once said, "If someone didn't want to work with me when I was alive, they don't need to stand at my grave pretending they cared," a friend recalled. There was no malice in his tone, only truth. It wasn't about Julia herself, but about what her absence symbolized: the emotional cost of unfulfilled potential. A reminder that even for legends, not every chapter gets written, and not every partnership finds its time. 6 names, 6 stories. From Madonna's mockery to Sean Penn's rivalry, from Whitney Houston's estate and Robert Duvall's defiance to Taylor Sheridan's betrayal and Julia Roberts' distance, each represents a scar etched into the story of Kevin Costner's life. But beneath the feuds and frustrations lies something purer, a man who never traded authenticity for acceptance. Kevin could have had an easier career, said one longtime agent. He could have smiled through the fake friendships and played the Hollywood game, but that's not who he is. Instead, he chose truth, sometimes costly, sometimes lonely, but always his own. Those who know him best say that's why he inspires such fierce loyalty from the people who matter. For every person on that not welcome list, said a producer, there are dozens who would drop everything to work with him again. As Costner enters the twilight of his career, he seems at peace with both the triumphs and the heartbreaks. He's learned that legacy isn't measured by applause, it's measured by integrity. And in planning his final farewell, he's simply extending that same principle to the end. He doesn't want actors in his audience. He wants friends in his circle, not cameras, just authenticity. Because in a world built on illusion, Kevin Costner has always seen through the smoke. And when his curtain finally falls, he wants the truth. Nothing less, nothing more